And I think this approach of just you have to get it really right before you start doing things is very intimidating for a lot of people. They're not encouraged to, start talking and start listening. I think for a lot of people, you just have to get rid of this way of thinking and just, it's okay. You can just talk and make mistakes. It's okay. Just start doing it.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week on Speaking of Language,
Loïs Talagrand recounts his journey from English student with poor conversation skills to an accomplished polyglot with a popular YouTube channel about language learning.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager. We are delighted to welcome Loïs Talagrand to our podcast today.
Loïs is a software developer, language learner, and avid YouTuber who explores best ways for learning languages on his channel.
Welcome to Speaking of Language, Loïs.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So to get us started, please tell us a little bit more about you and your own path with languages.
Well, I was born and raised in Tahiti in French Polynesia, so my native language is French. Mm-hmm. And I started learning English like any, kid who in the French, system of education at about 11 or 12. But, just in school for about 7 years. And I think probably when I was 18, around that, I went to college in Switzerland in the French-speaking part. And that's where I started meeting with, a lot of foreign students and a lot of Americans, a lot of Italian speakers. And I realized that after 7 years of learning English, I was absolutely just terrible. I couldn't hold like a basic conversation with people. Yeah. It was really embarrassing. I remember a specific incident. I was on a train from, I don't remember where, but I was going to Geneva airport, and there was this British guy. I remember him being as a little posh, I guess. He went to some prestigious university in the UK or whatever, and he was talking to me in the train, and in my mind, I was like, what is he talking about? And yeah, this was just, there are no words to describe this experience. It's embarrassing. It's alarming too, because after 7 years and I was a good student in school. Like I did the homework, I did all the steps, and I could not have a basic conversation in English. And so I think this was, the point where I realized, okay, I need to take this more seriously. I mean, specifically for English, because as a software developer, just as a person, as a modern person, you need to understand English. Otherwise, it's pretty much the equivalent of being illiterate, a few hundred years ago. So I took this seriously, and then it started me on a journey of learning other languages, starting with Italian, because, there are lots of Italian speakers in Switzerland, and then Japanese. But that's sort of my journey with languages. And then I started a YouTube channel about language learning, where I interview a lot of academics and, researchers in this domain. So it's been a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Terrific. Well, that's a perfect segue into our next question. Would love to hear about the origins of your YouTube channel and what can viewers find there?
Well, so I think, if you look back, probably my first videos, it was nothing fancy. I was recording with a very bad webcam, just showing my screen, and I was telling people, hey, I'm using this website to learn Japanese, and it's pretty good, and look at the features. And then, progressively, I started doing more, big idea sort of videos. And I realized that because I'm interested in health and fitness. And so in this domain, you get a lot of videos and podcasts where, you get scientists, they tell you, well, here's what the research says about, how many sets you have to do for bench press or stuff like that.
Sure.
And I just thought, well, there's no equivalent for language learning. Like I'm learning languages, but it's sort of, I'm trying to guess which methods are working, and it shouldn't be that way. So I reached out to some, researchers who were kind enough to come on the show. I'm thinking specifically of Professor Paul Nation, who apparently is a legend in
Oh, yeah.
the vocabulary research. And I had no idea at this point. I just saw some of his papers, and I thought, well, this is pretty interesting. I guess I'll send him an email.
Yeah.
And we had a 2-hour conversation, which now come to think of it, that was just way too long. We should have done 1 hour because, I want to be respectful of people's time. But it was a very interesting 2 hours for sure. And I've done, I don't know how many interviews, but it's only getting started. I think I've interviewed a lot of people in the field of vocabulary, but I want to expand a little bit and interview some more people.
Well, and you have had some pretty big names besides,
Yep.
Paul Nation on your channel, which is quite awesome. So, Loïs, what have you learned from your conversations and your own exploration of tools and apps for language learning? What is the best way to learn a language as an adult?
Yeah, the $1 million question. Well, I think one observation that I have is that if you just ignore all the science and the research, take a look at, influencers. I guess I'm an influencer in a way, but there are people who explicitly on the internet, they give instructions on how they learn languages, and you should do this and you should do that. And the problem is that you just watch different videos, you listen to different advice. Everyone has their own version of what works and what doesn't work. And the truth is, I think everything works. The only two questions that you need to focus on is, number one, how time efficient is it? So if you're someone who's really busy, like most of us, you have a job, maybe you have kids and stuff like that, then if you only have 1 hour every, few days or so, how much of that, like what is the return on what is the return on this 1 hour going to be? And number two, for people who are not so worried about time efficiency, then how, is this efficient enough, but also is this sustainable in the sense that, is it fun? Do you see yourself doing this for multiple years? Because learning languages, it takes years, even for an English speaker learning, I don't know, French, which is, a language that is close enough to English, that is going to take hundreds of hours for sure. So this is sort of my conclusion. I lean more on the side of I want to be time efficient. And in this case, I've interviewed multiple guests, and there are lots of activities that you can do for learning languages in a time efficient way. I'm thinking specifically of, my interview with Paul Nation. We talked a lot about flashcards, for example, using active recall to learn vocabulary, using the keyword technique, for example, which is a mnemonic sort of technique. So these techniques can be used to speed up the acquisition of vocabulary. And I think vocabulary, from the information I've been able to gather, is definitely the most important aspect of language, because that's where most of the meaning is, vocabulary. If you know the words, then the other stuff is going to, in some way, just fall into place. So yeah, these days I'm really focused on learning vocabulary and doing so using deliberate learning techniques, which is somewhat controversial. I know that some researchers are all about, deliberate learning activities, not so good, just to, input and stuff like that. But I've been having good results using these techniques.
Yeah, absolutely.
So are there any pitfalls we should avoid as we embark on learning a new language?
Well, I think so. The classic sort of pitfall, I think, for people coming out of school. I mean, I'm not really too familiar with the American system of education, but my understanding is that most students have to study a second language, and most of the time this is going to be probably Spanish or French or German. I'm not sure whether this is mandatory or not, but my experience, at least in the French system, has been that there is a lot of focus on learning grammar, and I mean, this is not bad, but just learning things, like you have to get it right before you start producing or you start doing things. And I think this approach of just you have to get it really right before you start doing things is very intimidating for a lot of people. They're
Right.
not encouraged to, start talking and start listening. I think for a lot of people, you just have to get rid of this way of thinking and just, it's okay. You can just talk and make mistakes. It's okay. Just start doing it. And so the second sort of pitfall that I think I talked about it, but you're not focusing on just learning vocabulary enough, because vocabulary, in my opinion, and in the opinion of, Paul Nation, Batya Laufer, Norbert Schmidt, I mean, all the vocabulary superstars, this is really going to be the big problem. Like, you need to know the words. If you don't understand what is being said to you, I mean, there may be some listening comprehension issues, but most of the time, you just don't know the words. So you need to know the words.
Right.
That's it.
Well, and that's where we see similarities between first and second language acquisition, I think, right? Kids make mistakes, right? They babble. They don't care if something doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I think we lose that carefree surrounding, I mean, it's, as we get older, there's a lot of saving face, and you don't want to sound maybe non-educated if you make mistakes or things like that. So yeah, I like that you are suggesting to just jump in and do it, practice, make mistakes, right?
Yeah. And I think you don't need to necessarily, start talking and make tons of mistakes and stuff like that, but just, talk a little bit, and, you've studied sort of the vocabulary and some common grammatical patterns, and you can work with that progressively. But you don't need to worry about, people. I mean, I can tell you from my experience, and I'm sure that you guys in the U.S. have this experience all the time. There are lots of immigrants in the U.S., maybe Spanish speakers and stuff like that. When they talk and they make mistakes, I mean, there's nothing to be ashamed of. You're not judging the person for making mistakes. So,
yeah, and as long as it doesn't stop the flow of communication, right? I mean, what difference does it make if every word ending is correct? If every subject verb agreement is correct, as long as you get the point across and you can have a conversation. I mean, it depends on the goals, of course, of the language learner too, but. So you are a software developer by day. Is there any overlap with your programming work and your own language learning? Like, have you developed your own platform for language learning? Is that something that you are working on or might be working on?
well, actually, after my interview with Professor Paul Nation, I was so inspired by what he said that I thought I need to do something about this. And so vocabulary being I think the main bottleneck for a lot of people, including myself, especially, learning Japanese, I thought we talked a lot about the importance of frequency in vocabulary. So when you're learning a language, it's important to learn the high frequency vocabulary first. And so I used my skills as a software developer to develop. It's not really a platform, but I use software, so code, I gathered about 1 million sentences in Japanese and in other languages as well. And these sentences come from news, so you know that they've been, edited and they're correct. There is definitely a bias towards, vocabulary from economics and politics and so on. But 1 million sentences, I analyzed them using Python, so, computer programming, to see what the frequency of each word is. I mean, the root of each word. And I built a vocabulary deck. I call this the Anki core deck because it's compatible with the app called Anki. And so I personally use this vocabulary deck on a daily basis, ordered by frequency. And there's a lot more information that I generated using AI, which is great nowadays. So each flashcard, there's about 10,000 flashcards in the decks. So for multiple languages, and you have the word, its translation, an example sentence, a translation, audio for the word, audio for a sentence, keyword technique. I mean, a bunch of information. And this is really a gold mine for learning vocabulary in multiple languages. So yeah, it's been very helpful being a software developer.
Nice.
So, sort of following along that track, what advice do you have for our listeners who may be interested in starting a YouTube channel of their own?
Right, YouTube. Well, I never really imagined myself being a YouTuber. I mean, I don't have like a million subscribers or anything, but I have, I think, around 50,000 or so. So I think most people in the language learning community on YouTube, they would recognize my face at least. I would say that, are you asking this from the standpoint of like YouTube becoming a career or just a hobby?
Either way, whatever you have to offer. Yeah.
I think in terms of, for me, it's sort of, half and half, right? I like doing this, but at the same time, now it's come to the point where, there are sponsorships and stuff like that, so I can make a little bit of money on the side. I think the important thing is just think of it as being just like a job in the real world. The videos that are going to do well, the channels that are going to do well on YouTube are the channels that offer stuff that is rare and valuable. So you can't just make videos about, things that people have already posted on YouTube and just hope to do great. You need to do stuff that is rare and valuable. So I think where I got it right at, to some extent is there were a few interviews of academics in the field of, linguistics before I started, but not so many. And I just made it a thing, like interview people every week or every 2 weeks and post this on YouTube. So I think this would be my advice. Just try to find a niche or a niche. I'm not really sure. And that's how you become successful. But try to do it, sooner than later because it's becoming more and more competitive for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have any new and exciting future plans for your channel? Anything that is on the horizon that you may want to share with our listeners?
Well, yes. I don't want to talk too much about the details of this, but so I've been interviewing a lot of people in the field, but I think there's one dimension that is sort of lacking with my videos. It's the actual, look at me, learn a language, and here's how I do it, and here are the results. So I am going to start very soon a sort of an experiment, as a language learner, but also as a full-time employee. I'm going to learn a language, which I'm not going to reveal which language it's going to be, but I'm going to learn a language within a limited amount of time. So I'm thinking specifically of probably 3 or 6 months. So, and I'm not going to spend too much time. So 4 hours a day is just impossible. I'm just going to replicate sort of the schedule of a normal person. And I'm going to document this journey, and we'll see what kinds of results I have at the end of it. And I'll show people that, well, by applying this advice that I got from all the interviews, you can get pretty good results. I'm very confident that I can do this, not because I'm some sort of genius or whatever, because it's just because, in the past I've learned languages, I've learned from my mistakes, and I think it's very realistic in 3 to 6 months for a language that is not too far from English or French. You can get to a pretty good conversational level.
Nice. Well, we are on standby to see what that language is, what the process is, and especially what the results are going to be. That's cool.
Pretty exciting, yeah.
Yeah. So you're mentioning you have a surprise mystery language queued up that you're going to be attempting to learn next. And you've mentioned you've learned Italian and Japanese in addition to English. Any other languages that you're interested in learning? What's on the wish list, obviously, without spoiling the next one you have queued up?
Well, so actually the next one I'm thinking about was not necessarily on my wish list, but for different reasons, that's what I'm going to choose. But on my wish list, I mean, I don't know. I think if you asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have put like half of the languages on the planet on the list. But now, I don't know. I think, learning Japanese it's been a humbling experience because, I mean, between learning English or Italian and learning, Asian languages, it's just, it's a different ball game for sure. I don't know about you guys, but I've been watching Squid Game, which is pretty cool. I mean, season 1, season 2, and probably season 3 soon. And I just thought that it's so cool, like the Korean, soundtrack. It just sounds so cool. So maybe Korean, but then again, I mean, I have so much more work with my Japanese. I can have fluent conversations, but then there are topics and things that I'm not functional in at all. So we'll see. Maybe Korean, but maybe in a few decades, we'll see.
There you go. It's good to be aspirational, and it's good to have goals that will take you, across the next few decades. I like that.
Sure, yeah. We got time.
Loïs, where can our listeners learn more about you and your work?
Well, for sure, my YouTube channel. So you just type Loïs Talagrand on YouTube and you'll find me. I also have my website, loistalagrand.com. There's not much on there right now, but as soon as I'm done with the challenge I talked about, then there's going to be a lot more content. And you can also find me on, any podcast platform, specifically Spotify and Apple Podcast.
Awesome. Great.
Fantastic. Well, Loïs, it's been great hearing about everything that you're up to. We really appreciate your time. But before we sign off, we'd like to ask you for a word in a language you love, are learning, want to learn, whatever it may be, that feels good to say. What's that word?
Well, actually, I remember that this was, I needed to think of a word. Last night, as I was taking out the garbage, and so I was not really sure of what kind of word to pick, and I thought I wanted to pick something that was a little bit, that had some style, I guess. And I thought of a Tahitian word, actually, that I always thought it was it's pretty wonderful. It's the word mana. I don't know if you're aware of it. I think some people in Hawaii know what it is. It's a Polynesian word, but Tahitian people use it a lot. So mana is it's a word that, as they say, it gets lost in translation, I guess. In Polynesia, mana is sort of the energy, the power, not necessarily of people, but, in Polynesian theology, there's energy in the land, in the sea, in objects and stuff like that. So I just think it's a wonderful word.
That's awesome. I like that. Wow, that's great. Well, Loïs, we wish you all the best for your upcoming language learning journey, and we're super excited to see how that all pans out. And thank you so much for speaking of language with us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Join us next week to hear about the wonders of the Cornell Botanic Gardens and what plants have to do with languages and cultures. Until then,
Auf Wiederhören!
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu.
And follow Cornell LRC on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelika Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
Recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.